The Joint Chiefs Chair, General Dan Keane, will travel to Puerto Rico to visit the U.S. base there. He'll also visit some of the Navy ships assembling off the coast of Venezuela. Four-star General, retired General, that will be General Jack Keane, joins me now. General, the pressure on Maduro is coming from all sides. His days in office are surely numbered. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, certainly there's a lot of pressure being applied to him, obviously psychological pressure, and really the pressure is being put on those who are the elites that are supporting Maduro, in a sense that, you know, they got to be asking themselves the question, is it worth continuing to support Maduro at the expense of the pressure the United States is placing on us? And clearly that's a decision President Trump would like them to make, and come to the conclusion that we have to make a change here and bring somebody else in, and hopefully somebody that the United States can work with and not is aligned as a narco trafficker himself and in bed with the cartels and endangering the lives of American citizens. So that's really what's at stake here. And obviously there's an implied threat here, Stuart,
yeah.
You know, that the administration is willing to use some force here to compel Maduro to change his behavior. So that obviously is on the horizon. There's plenty of aircraft moving around there, and that's why the FAA put a warning out. And when it comes to the FAA warning, it's not just that the aircraft are doing things. For our audience to understand, that means that Maduro's air defense systems are on high alert in the event there's going to be some kind of military kinetic action against the regime. And that always portends danger for commercial aircraft in a hostile situation. In the late 1980s, a graphic example of how good people can make a mistake under stressful circumstances, the United States was engaged in combat with the Iranians' Navy and patrol boats and taking down some of their oil platforms. And a ship at sea in the Persian Gulf mistook an Iranian airliner for a fighter aircraft and brought that plane down and killed everybody on it.
Yeah.
A horrible mistake by a human being who is well trained and under stress made that kind of decision. So that's why the FAA is likely taking some prudent measures here,
sure,
that even though hostilities haven't broken out, there's potential for that, and there's also potential for human error.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Mideast. The U.S. plans to build a Hamas-free green zone in Gaza. But who's going to disarm Hamas? That's not been decided yet, has it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really is one of the major impediments here. What has happened, this is a process that's going to take some weeks and possibly months to unfold. So the UN Security Council has authorized the formation of an international stabilization force. And now we have volunteers from about 6 or 7 different countries to make up that force. So that's number one. And that force will be somewhere north of about 12,000, the number to be finalized to be sure. But what it really comes down to, it's important who is going to participate, who is going to command it. Right now, possibly the Egyptians. But what are the missions going to be? And you pointed out one of the critical missions. Obviously, they're there to enforce peace and provide a stable and secure environment. But are they going to disarm and demilitarize Hamas, which is part of the deal? If Hamas refuses to do that, the agreement is that then they would be forced to do it. Will they accept that responsibility, and not only that, have the wherewithal to do that?
Right.
That is a big question mark as we look at this right now, Stuart.
Got it.
So that remains to be seen. It's going to take a few more weeks to unfold before we get those answers.
You know about this. Israel launched a major strike on Beirut that killed Hezbollah's top military leader. And my question is Hezbollah finally finished off?
No, they're not. But clearly they have suffered a huge, significant setback. What we're seeing in Lebanon is simply this. The major lesson, one of the major lessons, that Israel has learned as a result of the October 7th war is they can never again let Iranian proxies build up on their border military capacity to attack them. So what you see taking place in Lebanon right now is a continuous limited attack on Hezbollah's leadership that is still surviving, and they have decapitated most of it, Stuart. An incredible accomplishment. But secondly, as they try to move south and rebuild their infrastructure and put military capacity in place, Israel has conducted hundreds of airstrikes against them, despite the fact there's a, quote, ceasefire, because they are not going to let that military capacity build up. So killing this significant leader is all part of that strategy that the Israelis have. Yes, the Hezbollah still has capability, but more important, they have will to rearm and rebuild themselves, and the Iranians have given them something short of $1 billion to accomplish that end state. So yeah, Hezbollah wants to rise again. The point is Israel's not going to let it happen.
One more for you, General. The administration is touting peace talk progress with Ukraine. I believe you're involved in revising the peace plan. Let me just ask a general question. How's it going, General?
Well, I think this is an open process, and people are participating to improve it. And obviously, the delegation that the United States had, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, made some real progress in Geneva yesterday in dealing with the Ukrainians and also dealing with the Europeans. And to give you a sense of how open it is, a group that I gathered was able to provide some input to Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to also try to strengthen this deal. So I think we're in a process of improving it and making sure what is it we're trying to accomplish here, what's the necessary steps to see if we can patch something together that makes some sense not only to the Ukrainians and the United States, but to Putin. And obviously he has said no to every overture of this kind so far. It remains to be seen whether he'll change his stripes or not. But I think it also underscores the determination of the president. He has not given up on this peace process and trying to end the war. And he's trying to take another approach to do just that. After the Alaska summit a month or so ago, obviously didn't meet anybody's expectations. So here we have another attempt in that, try to stitch it together and see if we can put something that's coherent, that makes some sense to the Ukrainians, to the Russians, and obviously the United States and the Europeans.
Yeah, let's get this thing finished, over with. That'll be good. General Jack Keane, thanks for joining us, sir. We appreciate it always. Thank you.